All right. All right, so we are in Building Resilience and Wisdom in Challenging Times with Rabbi Amy Eilberg. And I think we all know that this is a timely topic. The COVID-19 pandemic has truly tested our coping skills and our resilience. And this past July, just when we thought things were getting better, the Delta variant arrived, and many in our community are still struggling. What can we learn from Musar, the teachings of Jewish ethics and spiritual development, and how can we build or strengthen our resilience? We are fortunate to have with us tonight Rabbi Amy Eilberg. And I wish I had time to read I'm sorry, my tongue tied, Rabbi Eilberg's full bio to you, but that would take us to 8 p.m. So I will just start with this. Rabbi Amy Eilberg is the first woman ordained as a conservative rabbi by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. She serves as a spiritual director, peace and justice educator, and teacher of Musar, a classical Jewish system of spiritual development. She recently served as the coordinator of Jewish Engagement for Faith in Action Bay Area, a multi-faith, multiracial social justice organization in the San Francisco Bay Area. She does work around civil discourse, peace building, anti-racism, and the pursuit of peace and justice. She travels widely teaching the art of listening, dialogue, and conflict engagement, and pursuing justice in venues throughout the country. In recent years, Rabbi Eilberg has been honored with honors from the Rabbinical Assembly, the New Israel Fund, and Teruah, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights. We are honored to have Rabbi Eilberg with us here tonight. Please welcome Rabbi Eilberg.
Thank you. Love that. Please welcome. Everybody's on mute. You got to laugh about our life on Zoom. So I really appreciate you all being here. It would have been fun to come to Dayton, but we're not quite ready for that yet. I understand it's a gorgeous evening in Dayton, so I appreciate you being here on your screen to talk about an issue that really is on many minds and hearts in these times. So I want to ask you a question. I don't know if we have chat function restored yet, but maybe just even if we don't, a thought experiment. Imagine for a second that it's October 11th, 2022. The pandemic, God willing, is really in the rear view mirror. The virus still exists, but it doesn't pose much of a threat. And this year and a half that we've just lived through is a bitter memory. So I wonder, how will you look back on this time? If you were going to share in a few words, how do you remember that time, that 18 months that we were in COVID land? We were in the grip of this terrible coronavirus. So try typing into the chat. We'll see if that works, or unmute yourself. I'm looking for just a few words, very brief comments. Flexibility, nice. Comfortable at home. The slow pace was nice. It looks like difficult, yeah. So many opportunities to reach out and make a difference, more than usual. Wow.
For me, it was a totally different lifestyle.
Yeah. Confusion, starting a new job in a new city. Oh my gosh, so hard. More patience. This is an amazing array of answers. You are people who already practice resilience and wisdom, it's clear, both lonely and comfortable. That's very, very wise, very honest. So I hear in these beautiful comments a sense of putting words in your mouth, but it seems like there was maybe in you, either there was a conscious effort or you found yourself drawn to kind of make the best of it, to see, well, now in my words, I think I have momentum as I saw no need to slow down, maybe focus more wisely. Interesting. It seems like, at least in retrospect, you're saying that you realized that although it was difficult, there were things that were really positive. There were strange blessings, not to say that I believe in a God who would have sent this terrible virus so we could learn things, but that there were blessings, there were opportunities for learning and for growing. And actually we stretched and expanded in some ways during this period, even though it was undoubtedly a time of loss of many kinds for us and for many people, and a time in which really stark questions of inequality surfaced. Very early in the pandemic, I think it might have been like March 14th or 15th, our lockdown in California was just beginning. I was on a webinar with someone in Israel who does peace and healing work. And he said, he was already in lockdown, and he said, his name is Sammy. And he said he was already saying to him, every morning, he was looking himself in the mirror and saying to himself, how am I going to be different when this is over? And how are we all as a collective going to be different when this is over? So I realize, I'm sure, as a speaker on a webinar, you never know what it is that you said that may touch someone's heart. I have really carried that question with me throughout these many, many months. My goal for tonight is to really expand and deepen our sense, which clearly is already alive in you, of what we've been learning from the pandemic, from our experiences of fear and unpredictability and confusion and lack of control and the need to do without many things and real loss. During the same period, of course, we lived through a racial reckoning, which continues, all kinds of questions about racial injustice in our country, which are profoundly difficult and challenging. During this period, of course, we saw an escalation and violence in Israel and Gaza, and in its wake, another wave of anti-Semitism. So it's been really a hard time. And yet I see from your projections forward into 2022 that you've been learning. So I'm going to share my screen for just a moment. I'll do this periodically and then have us come back together so we can see each other. A lot of people are using the term resilience. And here's the best definition I've seen of the word resilience during this period. And this is from trauma literature, from a book called The Inheritors, from a scholar about intergenerational trauma. Resilience is the process of creating meaning out of the contradictions of life's darkness and light. It builds on the strength of relationships and community. It is the affirmation of life and of our own power. It leads to growth, compassion, and positivity. It's a very, very, very rich definition. I mean, it's really a definition of how to live a good life, right? How to live a meaningful life, including, without denying, including the challenges that we encounter, and without being Pollyannish, allowing ourselves to move into growth and compassion and positivity. I get a little nervous sometimes about the use of the term resilience. I think it can be used in a facile sort of sense of like a Pollyannish sort of sense of like, oh yeah, something bad happened. Well, you fell down, now get up again. And if you didn't, it's as if you've been doing something wrong. Aren't you resilient enough? There's a potential in it for kind of blaming the victim. I mean, there have been times during all of this period that I don't think there's anyone I know who hasn't been laid low during, but not speaking of physical illness, that there are times that we just can't stand it. Even if none of us was sick, and probably someone in this number of people was sick or knows someone close who was sick, but even bracketing physical illness, just the incredible frustration of never knowing. It seems like the plans and the instructions are changing every 5 minutes. And in the beginning, I never even knew what I was going to be able to make for dinner, because I didn't know what kind of food was at the grocery store and what wasn't, and things, of course, much more serious. And I didn't meet my new grandson until he was 4 months old, which may not sound like a long time, but at first it really did. The losses of times to be together. I know a young man who hasn't seen his twin brother and his niece, hasn't seen his twin brother in 2 years, and hasn't met his niece ever. So all those kinds of losses. I don't think it's healthy or wise to say to oneself in one of those moments that you just want to cry, or you do cry, hey, why don't you buck up? You want to be, you should be resilient. So I want to, kind of reject that misuse of the term. There are many Jewish teachers whom I love and respect, who have been exploring, how do we say resilience in Jewish? What's the translation of resilience, which is a complex category, into Jewish terms? And for me, the piece of it that I've been most deeply drawn to comes out of that experience that I told you about. How are we going to be different when this is over? Which, is a question that's applicable to anything, to any positive experience, but certainly to any negative experience. In Musar, so I am a kind of deeply involved in studying and teaching, and sometimes writing about Musar, which is an ancient Jewish practice of virtue, a systematic practice of developing moral virtues and spiritual practice associated with these moral virtues, like kindness and compassion and courage and gratitude and the like. In the Musar tradition, I'm just going to share again for a second. One actually contemporary Musar teacher says there's a meta value in Musar, which is to say that one of the most important things in life is to constantly be a learner. This reaches all the way back to the Mishnah, often called Pirkei Avot, where one Rabbi Ben Zoma says, who is a wise person? So if you stop, look away from the screen for a second. Who is a wise person? It's a rabbi asking this question. You would think the answer would be someone who knows a lot of Jewish texts, right? But it's a trick question. The answer is not somebody who's smart or has degrees or has a lot of book knowledge, but the answer to the question in this context, who is wise, is one who learns from every person. And some commentators take that to mean one who learns from everything. So taking the stance of attentive curiosity, of the goal of living every period of life as an ongoing process of personal learning and growth, is arguably one of the most important teachings of Musar, and an extraordinary way to make even difficult moments in life into moments that are really, I hesitate to say gift, because again, nobody would wish for these gifts, but that in retrospect, there are blessings. We can create meaning out of them to the extent that we realize we can apply them. We can, this is in my path so that I can grow. So in that spirit, I ask, how has this year been a teacher for us? What have we been learning? Especially, I've noticed that although in many ways this experience of pandemic is utterly different from anything any of us has experienced before. I'm looking around the room, I don't think there's anyone on the call who lived through the the epidemic in the early 20th century. Of course, I didn't. It seemed unique and uniquely difficult. And in other ways, some of what we experienced during this time was a more obvious expression, were more obvious expressions of what actually is true of life all the time, except often we can avoid it. I'll say more about that in a moment. Yeah, but let me stop for a moment and just see. Oh yeah, I'm unshared. Anybody would pause for a second and unmute it and offer a comment or question? I'm gonna do this periodically as we go along. So we're a nice small group. It's like you can, if we were sitting around a circle, you would raise your hand and say something. So either you can put your question in the chat, or you can physically raise your hand, and either Tara or I will see you. Maybe not for the moment. So so let me move on. So I would say there are a lot of answers that I could give to the question, which of the virtues of the life practices that are really central to the way the Musar tradition defines a good life at any time, which of those qualities of soul have presented themselves for particular learning during the course of this pandemic. I could give you, I have a list of 10, but I'm not gonna give you all 10. I'm gonna talk about 3 ways in which this pandemic has challenged our practice, challenged the way we generally think about our lives. I'm making huge generalizations, of course, so I'm hoping that at some point someone will raise their hand and say, well, wait a second, that's not really how I've been constructing my life, but I'll just keep talking and hope that you'll interrupt me in order to share bits of your own experience. I would say it seemed to me, or what struck me the most, is that there are 3 qualities that are very, very important in Musar. That in the midst of all of the challenges, the pandemic presented extraordinary opportunities to grow in. And the ones that I'll highlight are humility, called anava in Hebrew, something called savlanut in Hebrew. I'll type it into the chat. I tend to use the Hebrew because savlanut is the word in contemporary Hebrew for patience, as in like, why are you keeping me waiting? Or like, hurry up, or this traffic is annoying, that sort of thing. But the root meaning of the word savlanut has to do with carrying. Like actually, if you get to the airport in Tel Aviv and you want someone to carry your bags, that porter is called a sabal. So the word savlanut also means carrying a burden. So I think the best English word that I know is forbearance, but that's kind of a strange word in English. Excuse me. So I use the word savlanut of how to bear things that are difficult. And the 3rd quality is chesed, or loving kindness. So I'm going to say a few things about each of those, share a couple of Jewish texts about each of those as we go along, and then stop at each point and invite your reactions. So first is humility. Humility, maybe the first thing I should share is my colleague, Alan Marinas, who's an extraordinary contemporary teacher of Musar, counters the very frequent impression that humility has a bad reputation in American society. American society is the opposite of a humble culture, right? Our culture is like, get yourself out there, post on Facebook what you had for breakfast this morning. People be interested, it's always about getting yourself out there. That's part of the way our culture has evolved. That's the opposite of humility, but humility is not low self-esteem. In his words, humility is not the opposite of conceit. that would be self-effacement or low self-esteem. Rather, humility is the midpoint. If you imagine a horizontal line, and on the one side of it, say on the far right, is conceit, and the far left is self-effacement, or perhaps low self-esteem. But in the middle is humility, not an extreme quality, but rather a balanced, moderate, accurate understanding of yourself that you act on in your life. That's why humility and self-esteem go hand in hand, or in a different place. And that was that was Maimonides. That was Alan Marinus quoting Maimonides. In Alan's words, humility is, quote, occupying your rightful place in life, neither too much nor too little. So again, humility is not to be confused with humiliation. It's, if we would connect it with another word in English, it might be, I never know how to pronounce this word. Is it humus? You know, the soil, or human, right? Humility is being a human being. That is to say, the knowledge that I am one person really endowed with a lot of power and gifts that God gave me. And I'm also only one person. I have a lot of limitations. There are a lot of things that I don't know how to do. There are endless things that I don't know. And I have, there are a lot of things that I have no power over. So that's always true, right? And Musar asks us to cultivate that awareness always. So here we are in especially early in the pandemic, feeling very vulnerable, grasping for answers. Why won't the scientists just get their act together? When are they going to tell us when there's going to be a vaccine? When people my age are going to be vaccinated? When my children be vaccinated? Should I send my children to school? Sure, shouldn't I? Should I go visit my, vulnerable loved one? Should I not? It left us feeling very vulnerable. It left us up against how little power we have over the big things in life, which actually, again, this is one of those things that when times are good, we can feel like we're on top of it, captain of the ship, master of our soul. But actually, we are each just one human being. There's much that we don't have control over and we don't know. And that's very countercultural and very uncomfortable, unless you actually lean into it as a quality of soul. It's actually better for me to live into the reality that is the truth, which is that I need to, in Alan Marinus's words, I need to occupy as much space as I'm supposed to occupy, right? As a rabbi, if I stand up, I'm supposed to give the sermon and I stand up on the pulpit or the Zoom pulpit, whatever it is, and it's time for the sermon. And I then just sort of start biting my nails or, twirling my hair or, kind of like, oh, gee, I don't know. I don't really have anything to say about this. That's not appropriate behavior, right? It's my role at that point to speak and invite people to listen. Hopefully I don't speak too long. I don't abuse that. But there are places where our role is to step up and to be strong and to offer what we have. And there are other times that we need to recognize, I don't know. There's a Talmudic saying, which I think is just amazing. Teach my tongue to say, I don't know. In contemporary society, I don't know is kind of a mark of shame, right? So powerlessness, uncertainty, vulnerability, that reality that in many cases we have not had the power to make ourselves feel better, that we're dependent on circumstances beyond our control, has been in our faces in a way. In times of severe illness in ourselves and our loved one, we also often break through our denial about this, that we know that much as we desperately want to make someone else better or ourselves better, we can't. We don't have that power. Actually, sometimes the doctor doesn't either. But here was a time when even those of us who were lucky enough not to get physically sick had to really grapple with our own powerlessness and vulnerability. And I suggest that living that way, even when we don't have to, even when, God willing, I hope it's soon, we're moving, maybe it's probably not a matter of weeks, but maybe months, when the pandemic will be more in control than it has been. even then, remembering to say, I don't know, and remembering to say, I can't, when that's the truth, leaves us more open to really living with the reality of life as it is, rather than trying to fake that I know more than I know, or that I have more power than I actually do. Yes, Aleka, not having control is very, very hard. I actually think that obviously there's so many things that have been hard about our experience of the pandemic, physical illness and loss and uncertainty, all of those. But I think that very loss of control is itself, we, 21st century Americans are pretty like comfortable and expect to be able to control things. I'm an intelligent person. I have access to whatever's the information I need. But here is this thing that no matter how much I know, I don't have control. And that in itself has been tremendously painful and challenging. And also has potential for learning. I'm going to share one more text. It's not an ancient text. It's a 20th century Israeli poem by the beloved Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. I'll read it in English, though the Hebrew is more beautiful. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. It'd be worth spending an hour, diving into this poem, but I'll just highlight, the expression of you or the person that you're talking to being absolutely right. You're talking about whatever is the issue, maybe a political issue that's very important to both of you, and you don't exactly agree, but both of you are absolutely certain that you're right. How much fruitfulness is there in that conversation, or is it just kind of people in verbal combat, where they're kind of throwing words at each other, sometimes weaponized, but nobody's really listening, or nothing's growing there. Where things grow, Amichai, is not in the places where we're completely right. That's a hard place. It's in places of doubt and love, I would say, uncertainty, awareness of our limitation, our vulnerability, our open-heartedness. That's where things grow. Like he's referencing, the temple was destroyed. So there's a place, that we know, that we revere, where the temple was destroyed. He's imagining that if we could just get beyond that fallacy or that bad practice of being attached to being so right all the time, then maybe even that house could be rebuilt, or the sacred house could be rebuilt. I'm going to stop share and now invite thoughts, questions. Barbara, please.
The idea that the pandemic has taught us that we haven't had control. I mean, we've never had control. You just
Exactly.
have to learn to go with life. Whatever happens, I mean, you have to have your foundation. We might think we have control, but we don't. What is it? Man plans and God laughs.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Exactly.
and as far as humility goes, something that took me a while to learn. I was kind of brought up to be entitled, and in recent years, one of the things I say to myself is, you are not special. Kind of puts me on level with everybody else. We're all on the same level. And that's one of the things I say to myself.
So I have to push back just a tiny bit on the "you're not special," and maybe this is just a matter of language, but I would say you are special, just as every human being is special. and I think this is what you meant, you're no more or less special than anyone else on the
Right.
planet. Right. Exactly. And I love it, that Yiddish proverb. It sounds better in Yiddish, right? Humans plan and God laughs is pointing to that same thing, though. I think in our time, there's a real attachment to this illusory notion that we are in control. We can send people to the moon and the space stations and all of that. We can cure all these illnesses. So we relax into whatever happens. So that those moments when that illusion is pierced are painful and also growthful. Yeah, totally agree. Thoughts, questions? Marcy, did you just unmute?
Yeah, I did. It's interesting because I read my Musar every day, and with what you're talking about, I go back to gratitude and the idea that, well, the phrase of awaken to the good and give thanks, and that's what this pandemic has done for me, is in many ways to try to find the good that's come out of. There's so much pain and so much sorrow during this time, and I'm the one that moved to the new city, new job and all that. But there have been some gifts, and I try to focus on that at least once a day, if not more. And so along with that, I also love the word, and we don't really use it in Judaism, grace, giving myself grace, giving others grace. And I don't know why we don't use that word, but for me, it goes along with that idea of gratitude.
Yeah, I agree. Don't get me started. There's certain words in English that get used a lot in Christianity, and then Jews kind of say, oh, we can't use that word because it's a Christian word, when actually the notion, grace means gifts, especially from God, that we didn't deserve or expect. When something comes our way, we didn't do anything to make it so, we couldn't have controlled it, and yet something beautiful happened. That's what grace means. That's completely Jewish. So gratitude, thank you. At one point, I was thinking I was going to include gratitude among my big three today, and it ended up not using. But yes, I mean, I've done hospice work in my years as a rabbi, and it's been my experience that often when people are very ill, not everyone, but some people get more grateful when they realize that their time is limited, their abilities are limited, and then they sort of naturally move into the space of, I want to treasure the time I have, I want to treasure the opportunities I have. Just as we're talking, I'm remembering a woman who had been a little, by her own description to me, had been a little cantankerous when she had been younger, but now that she was sick, she would say every morning, I just marvel at how beautiful the sunshine is. The sky is. She was moved to that kind of gratitude in a time when it's very possible to let our attention rest on what we lack, or either because of grace we just naturally move over to gratitude, or we cultivate it as you described. Somebody else, Helene, please.
I guess I look as being grateful because you look at what you have and someone else that's going through. And I can remember my grandmother used to say she'd throw all her troubles up in the air, but yet she'd only want to pick up her own, as she's picking them up. And I think about that a lot because, I didn't have COVID. My family didn't. Thank God it's not over yet. But there were a lot of things to be grateful for, although, there were days when I got up and was like, we can't do this. I can't do this committee. I can't, do anything but stay at home. But yet I had a home to be at, and I had food on my table. So you have to look at being grateful for what you have.
Exactly. During that period when there were at least where I live, it's not so true anymore, but early on there were these crazy shortages, and sometimes you couldn't get toilet paper, and sometimes you couldn't get paper towels, and sometimes you couldn't get mushrooms just in the night that I wanted to make a mushroom quiche. Yeah, you know, it was sort of unpredictable. And I would get like crabby, oh, how am I going to make that quiche without the mushrooms? That's trivial, obviously. And then I would quickly shift. I would find myself shifting to look at these people who work in the grocery store, and they're exposed every day, all day long, to all these people. I was never so grateful for the staff in the grocery store and the checkers as I was during that point. So it really was a spur to gratitude.
And I will say, I think there are many studies that show that gratitude is not to step away from the value and link toward Judaism, but that gratitude is significant when it comes to mental health and happiness. You know, it's just,
Right.
it's
Actually good for us.
It's
not
good for
only,
us.
it's not
It's
only
good for
morally
us.
good, spiritually good, but it's actually physically good.
But I agree with the gratitude. And Rabbi Eilberg, you talked about being grateful for the people who worked in the grocery store. When I went for my second vaccine, I went to the convention center here in Dayton. And the first one, I was just amazed at how friendly and kind and upbeat all the volunteers were and staff. And so when I went back for my second one, I took a little goodie bag, a little basket, and I filled it with chocolate. And my entire way winding through, I was giving chocolate to every volunteer and medical worker, because I was just so grateful for everything that they were doing, for their kindness, for their work, for being on their feet day after day, working the clinics and everything they were doing, knowing that they were exhausted all the time they were putting in, you know.
There's an example that gives me a great idea. I'm hoping to get a booster, you know, maybe the next third, you know, booster.
They'll love you. They'll love it. They'll feel
Maybe when we're
appreciated. It made
jumping-
them smile. They're,
course
they're
it
out
will.
there and they were exhausted at the time. They were working all these clinics.
And that's a beautiful example of how gratitude gives rise to as an impetus for acts of loving kindness. So thank you for sharing that. So onward. Yes, please. Who is
I
Felix?
would like to comment that you attracted me with the admiration of nature, admiration of our life, admiration what we have. Isn't it a form of prayer? It's an awe, in front of the creation, in front of the sun and whatever we have, a form of prayer. I also wanted to mention that it's not only during epidemics that we are helpless. We may not realize it, but there are many other times that we really have very little input in what is happening to us. And,
Absolutely.
don't realize that.
Absolutely. So it's not something to be fought. This is not something that we have to be embattled with. Oh no, I have to restore control, which I see all around me. I don't know if you do. People sort of desperate to get their sense of control back, when to a certain extent we can't, because we never had it. It wasn't taken from us. We never had it in the first place. So I'm going to move on to the next quality, which I have actually thought a lot about, this savlanut, this bearing difficulty, forbearance, if you will. This is also in the same way, as many of you have articulated, it's not that life was entirely easy before, and only during the pandemic have we had challenges. But the challenges were of a new sort, and they were overwhelming, and they were kind of all consuming, and they were all across the field of our spectrum of our experience. And there were times, and I knew a fair number of people who were I think I knew a lot of people who were mildly depressed, especially the first year. I have a friend who said, everybody's depressed. Sometimes I heard people saying that, we need to be extra kind to each other because everybody's a little depressed, as if we were carrying around extra weight, which we were psychologically. So the Musar teaching about savlanut is to say, this is my words now, we have two choices when faced with, I mean, we have many choices, but among others, we have two choices when facing the natural challenges of life. One is that we can fight like hell. Now, I'm not saying that there are times that it's right to fight like hell. When our loved one is sick, I want, I want the very best treatment, of course. But to fight like hell of like, there shouldn't be something challenging happening. I like, what happened to my sense of ease? We could have lived with, over this past year and a half, with a sense of sort of reactive negativity, just constantly, I can't stand this and I can't stand that. I often say, one of my stepsons, who's now an incredible 32-year-old, wonderful human being, when he was little, he used to say, I hate that, about whatever it was, some trivial thing he would say, I hate that. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't want him growing up, hating all of these things. Well, he grew out of it. But I think there is often that inward instinct to sort of fight back, to be embattled with our own experiences, as if it's an outrage that something uncomfortable is happening or something painful is happening. And instead, and it sounds like, those of you who have spoken have really been practicing in this way over the course of the 18 months. It's like we've had our moments of feeling, bowled over and having, carrying all this extra weight of difficulty and loss and uncertainty. But also deciding consciously or unconsciously not to make that situation worse by bringing a lot of restless, agitated, judgmental energy into it. I hated that they didn't have the mushrooms in the store. What's the deal with the toilet paper? I keep reaching for the trivial examples, but they were so concrete. Can't stand it that I could, and that I had to miss this, this trip. Rather, we had an opportunity, and I think I realized, I practiced it better some days and not as well, other days. We had really a unique opportunity to like, okay, here it is. There is a lot of stuff here that we don't like, that we wouldn't have chosen, that we wish would be over tomorrow. I mean, of course, on the extreme end, we want the dying to end. We want the illness to end. We want everyone to be protected. But even on the less extreme end, there's a lot that's been annoying. Oh yeah, my kids used to say, oh, that's so annoying. There's been a lot that's annoying. But the path of wisdom has to do with kind of taking a breath. And this is a path of resilience too. Okay, how am I going to meet this challenge? Am I going to add a lot more like negative thoughts and tell the story, rehearse the story in my head over and over again about how outrageous it is that, they didn't have the supply chain problem. We've been to the hardware store 5 times and I still can't get the damn, whatever it is. This was a growth opportunity for us to practice recognizing over and over again. Life includes challenge. I have a new favorite book by a beloved Buddhist teacher, contemporary Buddhist teacher named Pema Chodron. It's called Welcoming the Unwelcome. It's about this. I think one shouldn't take this to an extreme. I don't think she does, but there's some things that shouldn't be welcomed, right? People being actively hurt should not be welcomed. Someone hurting me or someone that I love should not be welcomed. That that's a time to try to stop the harm. When I perceive injustice, I need to stop it. But when it's something that's not, it's really not actively harmful. It's just it's irritating or touches a place of pain in me. That's actually not an outrage, and the path of wisdom can be how can I absorb this? How can I use this as another moment to say, yep, this is one of those moments. And I can live through this too, and I can meet it. And it might even, back to the, constant attitude of learning, it might even have something to teach me. In Jewish practice, the opposite of impatience is either arrogance, which is interesting, the notion that, like, the Barbara used the word entitlement, that notion, which I think is familiar to many of us, I should get what I want. Things should go my way because I'm special, right? Using your language again, like, how could this be happening to me? It is kind of an arrogance, which is a very, very negative concept in Musar. The Musar masters also talk about idolatry, would you believe, as the opposite of patience. The sense that, the world events should really be unfolding the way I want them to. Is kind of a small step away from I should be in charge of the universe, which, when I say it that way, of course, it's absurd. But these are learning opportunities. They're learning opportunities every day, as you've said before. Just a couple of two beloved texts. Those of you who are synagogue people know these verses from the book of Exodus, because we chant them frequently, and especially we chant them over and over again during the high holy days. God says, at a moment when Moses has said to God, tell me who you are, show me who you are. And God says, okay, this is who I am. God, I am merciful, compassionate, patient, abounding in love and faithfulness, assuring love for thousands of generations, and so on. That's a big part, as the rabbis understood it. That's a big part of who God is. God could be furious with us all the time. Look around the world. These are people that this is a universe that God created, and look how people, just take one example, look how humans are treating the beautiful planet. God could be furious all the time, as it were. But God over and over again gives us breath, gives us a chance to take another breath and to try to make it better in the coming day, in the coming moment, in the coming day, month, year. A non-Jewish source, if attributed to Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, I don't actually know the source, but I've seen it, attributed to him. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. That person, that coworker, that person who's driving obnoxiously, next to you, the person who cuts in line ahead of you in the store, someone in your family who really says something hurtful, any of those situations and more. If you actually switched your attention from trivial annoyance to serious discomfort or pain that person's behavior caused you, but if you could shift your attention from the irritation into this person's story, actually in every person there's sorrow and suffering. And if we really walked around noticing, I was taking my COVID walks around I happen to live in a beautiful neighborhood, so I get to take this beautiful walk and, looking at these other people who are doing the same thing. This is how we got out of the house, was to walk. And if I looked, which I sometimes remember to do at each of those people, thinking, each of these people is suffering a little bit, not suffering like people who are ill, not suffering like people who didn't have stable housing, not suffering like people in the world where there's no access to vaccination and so on. But each of us is having a hard time. And if I carried that thought into every interaction, I'd be more loving, and so would everyone else. Can we stop for a minute? Thoughts about savlanut, about forbearance, about the unwelcome? If not, let me move on to, this is really, I have to say, kind of my favorite virtue. I guess that's a crazy thing to say, but I don't know why one person is attracted to cultivating one virtue or another. Chesed, loving kindness, is a tremendously important value, as you probably know, in Jewish tradition. It's one of the qualities of God that we repeat and call to mind over and over again. And many of the mitzvot are oriented toward helping us to create a more loving heart, to engage behaviorally in acts of loving kindness, but also inwardly to cultivate a more loving heart. So in that spirit, I actually practice an originally Buddhist meditation practice called metta, which is Pali for something like friendliness or benevolence, something like kindness, which is a meditation practice in which people have been doing this for many couple of thousand years. Each morning recite phrases wishing well-being, first to myself and then to someone close to me and then someone that I don't know so well. And then if I'm really doing it right, that I'm actually able to wish well, offer wishes of well-being towards someone that I'm really having difficulty with, a relationship that's in a place of tension or even brokenness. And then when I'll do this at week-long retreats. Some people do it for a month at a time. I do it for a week-long retreat. Then ultimately to imagine offering wishes of well-being, like, may you be safe, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at peace, to everyone who crosses my path physically at the retreat center, to everyone who crosses my path by entering my thoughts, just to the whole world. Sometimes instead of using those phrases, I use the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing that we use in Jewish tradition in a number of ways, including blessing our children on Friday nights. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and keep you. May the light of the divine shine on you. May God lift God's face to you and grant you peace. Sort of wishing that not just to the people in the congregation where I daven, not just to my children, but to everyone without exception. So that line of thinking that I was describing before, being outside, sometimes when I was paying attention, sometimes I was just thinking about nonsense, but when my attention was really focused, I would really look another person in the eye. And sometimes really at the beginning, I felt like other people who were walking the neighborhood were also looking at me with particular kindness, as if we were all kind of checking out each other's faces, above the mask, to see, wow, you're probably having a hard time just as I am. The sense of people leaning into a desire without exchanging a word necessarily, but something about the expression around the eyes and forehead indicating, wishing you well. I hope you're doing okay. And then some people obviously doing that, dropping off food, calling people who lived alone. God help all the people who lived alone, especially hard. During the times that we could scarcely leave, when the sablanut leans directly into the kindness, that when we are aware that I and everyone else that I meet is living through hard times, it's a powerful reminder that other people, just as I do, need the basics of well-being, and I want the others to be blessed with well-being, because I understand that I don't know the specifics of what a stranger needs or hopes for or prays for, but I know the basics, that as a human being, they want health, they want well-being for their loved ones, they want a safe and comfortable place to live, and so on. So I can wish that for everyone. And this same same 20th century Musar master Rav Wolbe that I shared before has just a couple of extraordinary things to say about loving kindness. Some of you may know there's a verse in the book of Psalms, half a verse, Olam Chesed Yibaneh. The world is built of your love. So that's the verse. That's from Psalms 89, verse 2. Rav Wolbe continues, he takes it kind of literally, maybe too literally. The world is built of your love. So he's imagining the world literally being rebuilt in an ongoing way out of love. So he says every act of chesed, meaning loving kindness, even a small one, is an actual act of building and creation, enlivening the spirit of the downtrodden and the brokenhearted. Every time you bring a rose or a piece of candy or a cookie to someone in a service profession, every time you lean in with a special smile to someone who's accustomed to being invisible, like the mail carrier or the checker at the grocery store, you are literally, even a tiny act of loving kindness like that, he says, actually helps rebuild the world. So don't think, there's nothing I can do. Remember I said before that, there are limits to what we can do. This is what flips it. Like, there is something you can do. You can contribute to the rebuilding of the world, kind of metaphorically, by enlivening the spirit of the downtrodden, by committing an act of chesed. And this next text is too long for me to read the whole thing, but he says, some of you know that in that text that I was referring to before, the Kohanic blessing, the priestly blessing, may God bless you and keep you, may God bring the light of the divine to you, may God bring the divine face to you. So in the second, it says, may the light of God's face shine on you. So Wolbe says, hey, we are created in the image of God. It says that God can radiate divine light through God's face, as it were, metaphorically, poetically. So if God has light, if God has a radiant face, that means I and you, certainly that baby, have the capacity to radiate light with our faces. I mean this poetically, right? So there is a difference between if I'm walking around doing my business, sort of scowling and worrying about what's the next thing, or kind of chewing over some unpleasant conversation, or like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do all the next things on my to-do list, right? If that's what I'm broadcasting when I walk around my errands or my world, whatever it is, my daily life, that's really different from if I try to cultivate. I mean, I can't change the face that I have. This is the face that I have. But if I try to open that face so that it has a chance of having the divine love and light move through it, then I can contribute to creating a better world. So I wanted to share that with you. We may have time to go into small groups. Well, I can't decide. We're such a small group as it is. I don't know, Tara, what do you think?
I think we're an intimate group as it is. If you wanted to open up to discussion as whole group.
Yeah, so we can just open it. It's almost, we can just be together. Other thoughts? What does, either specifically about kindness, or what does all of this touch in you? Are there parts of you that resist some of the things that I've said? Are there things here that are learnings for you that you've also noticed, have been learnings of this time that you want to take forward in your life?
I think I've noticed that people have been realizing what's really important in life and seeing it from a different lens and weighing it out compared to how they were thinking before the pandemic. I've noticed different changes in some of the people that I know. So I think that's important and it's positive.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I agree with that too, that sense of perspective. we can so often lose. I find that too, by the way. One of the things I was thinking about a lot early in the pandemic was about mortality. And I mean that not that we should all be walking around grimly, contemplating the fact that we will all someday die, though we will. But that my experience in general is that in the presence of mortality, like when we're at a cemetery, in general, we tend to be kinder and we tend to be clearer about what's important. Like most people are not like worrying about their email when standing in the ICU visiting a loved one or, at the cemetery. So that sense of really a bigger picture, and the pandemic did bring our mortality very much to the fore. So yeah, I mean, again, so what are we going to learn is how do we remind ourselves to sustain that sense of perspective. Yeah. Elliot.
Yeah, thanks for your wisdom. I've been thinking about the last year and a half also, not just about personal growth, but it's also been a time of social transformation. And the pandemic has shown how frail and how vulnerable a large part of the population is, either by class or systemic racism. And I'm wondering how we square, and I debate this all the time with Ira Stone, how do we square like the personal virtues with the systemic change, where there seems to be a time to lose one's cool and to be outraged and to be concerned beyond kindness towards, sort of evil system or the evil structures we have.
Absolutely. Thank you for raising that. I think earlier in the pandemic, I used to talk a lot. I really had a vision of like the human race has had this experience all together. Every single one of us, everyone on the planet vulnerable to this microscopic virus will never be the same. We'll understand that we're interconnected in a way that, we used to resist. It's going to be different from now on. I mean, I really sort of believed that for a while. I'm not so convinced of that. I see wealthy countries hoarding vaccine, and just the unfathomable immorality of how many people in the United States and other Western countries are vaccinated, and how many people in poor countries have no access to vaccination. That's not something to practice savlanut about. That's an outrage. My understanding, so a couple of things. Musar is not about navel gazing. Musar is very much about working on ourselves and developing more wisdom so that we can take that wisdom out into the world. Each in our own way. Some people might say, I could spin that in a particular political, direction, because that's what seems right to me. But for everyone, it's absolutely not just for my own well-being. What good would that be if I had a heart full of loving kindness and I didn't use it? I didn't, really share it with other people. So I absolutely think that it's the broader picture, and I wrestle all the time with, I guess the other thing is that, and Alan Marinus is big on this point, that Jewish tradition has a strong behavioral focus, even bias. Some people say, Judaism doesn't care about feelings, doesn't care about what's inside, it only cares about what you do in the world, which is actually really demonstrably not true, but there is an emphasis in the Jewish tradition on, make it real by working on it in the world. So that's part of my answer. If we're not doing that, then we really are just navel gazing. I don't know if you are familiar with the work of David Jaffe, who's a Orthodox, modern Orthodox ordained rabbi, who has a kind of recent book called Healing the World from the Inside Out. He's been very, very strong background in Musar, and what his work is all about, applying wisdom of Musar to social justice work. So you might enjoy it. I've lost the order of who raised their hand when, but I see Marcy, your hand.
So, wow. Can you talk a little bit about the practice of Musar for those of us who this is a new term and a new way of living in this world? It would be great, because maybe it's something that we could start in Dayton or bring, you later on, or, but just that whole idea of how do you practice it? And do you?
So let's see, let me write a couple of things in the chat. The first thing, of course, is there are things to read. So if you want to read the first book that I would recommend, Ira Stone, that Elliot recommended, is also an extraordinary teacher. But I would especially recommend Ellen Morinus's book, Everyday Holiness. It's very, so that's the daily meditation book. Everyday Holiness is really a guide to, it's a guide to 10 or 12 of the most predominant midot, or virtues, and how to practice them, what Musar practice looks like. And I'll say a word about it in a moment, another word about it in a moment. The other thing you might check out is the Musar Institute.org. This was obviously, I know Alan Morinus, and I've taught with him and taught for him. So that's my kind of go-to place. This is the organization that he founded. This is what it looks like, not as a URL. If you look around that website, you'll see some answers. The question, oh, cool. And I teach Musar, actually. I taught a lot of Musar online to people all over the place. I often taught sort of 4-session series. It's Zoom, but all over the place. So that's certainly something that's possible. I would pick four of the qualities, and each week, or each class we would go through one of them. Classical Musar practice includes being with generally a small group of people, maybe 4 or 6 or 10 people, and also with a chavruta, 2 people who are study partners, each of whom is working on a particular midah, which is Hebrew for the virtue or quality of soul. So let's say this week is our week to cultivate loving kindness. What we do is my chavruta partner and I study some texts that we received from our teacher. We study some beautiful, rich texts that inspire and inform our practice. Every morning we take a phrase, of which there are many, but we take a particular phrase from sacred Jewish text and recite it every morning, like for 5 or 10 minutes. First thing in the morning, to recite it, close my eyes, breathe in that verse. Like, just to give you an example, like God, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, God who is gracious and compassionate. If I just recited that kind of synchronized with my breath over and over again each morning, it would begin to sink in a way, not just as words that I'm familiar with, but kind of drawing it into my heart. And during the day, my assignment all through the day, I actually have specific assignments that I've chosen of how I want to act on loving kindness during the day. It's more complicated. I'm giving it, very, very short. So there's a little behavioral component. I'm supposed to be doing certain things, very sort of measurable, small, accomplishable acts that means I'm bringing attention to my practice of loving kindness that day. And then at the end of the day, doing a journaling exercise. It could be a very short journaling exercise, but just at the end of the day, not to give myself a grade, but just to focus my attention, like, how did kindness come up today? Did I When did I miss opportunities to be kind? When was I really kind? Just to focus my attention and to notice, you know what, I totally blew it. I totally forgot loving kindness today. Or, you know, all day long, I was kind to people on a number of different occasions. So just that, you know, then when the chavruta or the small group gets together, often at the 2-week point, we get to share what it was like for us and how we were changed just a little bit by bringing such focused attention to that midah over the course of 2 weeks. My daughter is giving my husband a run for his money, so I have to go. Thank you for everything. Okay, that's a private message from Alec. Helene, are you raising your hand, or is that yes, please?
First, what was the first title of the book that Marcy held up? I didn't catch the title.
Yeah, that's the meditation book. I think it's Everyday Holy Day. Is that right, Marcy? Everyday Holy Day. So those are daily, you know, brief meditations based on Musar categories and concepts. And then there's Ira Stone's Musar Center. It's my experience is that Ira is off the charts brilliant. So is Alan Marinas. I find Ira's work just a little bit more philosophical, but also really profound. And he has also, his students have reported that their lives are transformed by studying with him, working with him.
What about changing to non-gendered language, though? Because I find this incredibly problematic.
Yep, we have to do it. I actually, you're talking to the right one. I personally edited a bunch of the Musar Institute's curricula to remove the male language, not from at least from the contemporary commentary. I think we did it with the original text too. Musar texts, there are a few contemporary Musar texts who are women, but they're ancient texts, they're classical texts, they're all male. We just have to do that translation. When my chavruta and I meet, we just say she, where it says he, or we alternate, or we say they, or we just, we could spend a lot of time like raging, oh, this is so infuriating that they're constantly, and this is demeaning to women. And many feminists, myself included, have been through periods of our lives when that seemed really important, to exercise that anger. At this point, as an aging feminist that I am, that was wrong. In their day, that's just how they wrote it. But I know that this applies to everything.
Do you have more women in your group than men, or is it men more than women?
Whatever I teach, I usually have more women than men in the group. But I don't think that's true across the board for Musar teachers. Maybe it's time. Yeah, Elliot, one last comment.
Oh, I was just going to ask Rabbi if Marinus's form of Musar always seemed to me very thick with the God language, and that it's linked more to a kind of traditional theistic worldview.
Yes.
Ira Stone's is much more reconstructionist and sort of recasts the theology, but retains the Jewish practice as a kind of mindfulness exercise. So we would say prayers, we would say prayers, but as a form of ethical mindfulness, not necessarily because we had theistic commitments or theological.
Wow, that means I haven't studied enough of Ira Stone. I need to go back and check that out. That's very, very interesting to me. Ira is a conservative rabbi, but that's really, really interesting. Now, Alan studied Musar with, I think it's fair to say, ultra-Orthodox rabbi. To be fair, the classical texts are completely theistic, right? And there too, at my most beloved chavruta for this stuff is a Reconstructionist rabbi, and he and I just as we translate the gender stuff that doesn't work for us, we translate the stuff that talks about God as if God were a living being, sitting on our shoulder, is going to swoop in and change things or in the world or punish us, that neither he nor I actually believes in. So there too, it just takes some creative reading. But thank you for that. That's important for me to know. So I think it's time to wind down. I tend to close all of my classes in song. We haven't had any music yet. So if you're willing, I would like to close with, remember I mentioned that that verse, Olam chesed yibaneh, the world is built of your love, from the Psalms. Rabbi Menachem Creditor, the conservative rabbi, social activist, wrote this very, very beautiful song based on those words. The world will be built with love, which has become a kind of anthem in many quarters, including in social justice quarters, and it's, well, it's all about love. So I would appreciate your staying muted, but as you learn it and want to sing along, that would be just lovely. I will build this world from love. And you must build this world from love. And if we build this world from love, then God will build this world from love. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for your engagement, for your words of wisdom. I really enjoyed being with you tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi Eilberg, for your words of wisdom and for being with us tonight. Can we have a round of applause, clapping jazz hands, whatever your mode is in cyberspace?
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the teachings on how we can think about ourselves and living with discomfort and not knowing, and acts of loving kindness as we move through the world, and challenging times for ourselves and with others, and thinking about social justice too. And we're thrilled to have you with us.